European Central Bank funding. So, according to this article, it was long awaited. It was a long awaited injection via bonds from the European Financial Stability Facility. See, that this goes to imply that there's going to be a constant crisis, right? If there isn't, as if there hasn't been one already. But we have that here in the United States as well. These permanent financial stability committees and basically institutions. So, so the crazy thing is that they dubbed this a bailout, as if the people in Greece were begging for this. The majority of people in Greece, right, that pay taxes, they were begging for this money to come. Come on, bail us out, because that's, if you give us this money, it's going to solve the problem. Well, everyone knows that it's not going to solve the problem. It's just going to make it worse. So, yeah, it's kind of a deceptive word. And then what it says here that to cover the reason they're doing this, they say, is to cover basic state payments if efforts to revive falling tax revenues fail. Falling tax revenues, that means people don't have money to pay the taxes anymore. I guess Greeks are supposedly notorious for not paying taxes, but I guess if you don't have as much money, you don't have any money or a job, and you're going dumpster diving, you're probably gonna end up not paying your taxes, right? It says here, families crumble in Greece's economic crisis. It says here that a 70-year-old cannot afford to go to the supermarket anymore, so for the past few months, he is starting rummaging for food in dustbins, basically garbage. He goes out in Athens at night so that no one sees him. And it says when Sky News met him, he was collecting onions for some wheelie bins. It says here, since my pension was cut, I cannot buy food, so I look through the garbage. I can only pray that things get better. It says here that he is among an increasing number of pensioners who have slipped into desperate poverty and rely on waste food to survive. So yeah, it goes on. Life has not always been like this, but the debt crisis has left them unable to provide for themselves. So we all know who issues credit, which are basically banks, and that. I think even the Goldman Sachs was actually involved in a big scheme over there in Greece as well. So it says here, debt hit Greece running out of medications. So I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, because it's less prescription eugenics. But who knows? Maybe people still want their insulin and stuff like that. And it says pharmacies in Greece were on strike earlier this week in protest at the government not paying them for medicines that should be free to their customers. So it says here the pharmacies now have huge debts to pharmaceutical companies for drugs they have handed out for free of charge. It says here the government owes us 30,000 euros, but we have not been paid by them for a year and a half. So just like this story, families crumble. You know, this is economic warfare, and this is social warfare. So it's about killing families, but it's also about killing people. So it says here, soon people will start dying because of a lack of medication. Well, that's the point, because you're now a useless eater, right? You're eating out of dustbins because you can't provide for yourself or your family. So it says here, bank profits hit 5-year high. 4 years after crashing the global economy as a result of their irresponsible gambling with other people's money. I don't think that was a real reason. I think there was more to it, but U.S. banks posted record profits for the first quarter of 2012, according to a report released by the FDIC. The quarterly banking profile showed that net income for the first quarter of 2012 was $35 billion, up by $6 billion from the first quarter of 2011, while total revenues increased for only the second time in the past 5 quarters. So the biggest thing was to consolidate. It was all about consolidation. So that was the biggest reason, I think, in creating these institutions and stuff like that, these permanent bailout institutions, which are basically really good for the banks. So it also destroys whatever disposable income that most middle class people had all around the world to not have it anymore, which makes them less of a threat. So, you know, part of population reduction is to decrease the threat. Remember, I covered that before about with Plato using that quote to prevent a rebellion. So they got to keep the numbers down. It has nothing to do with too many people, not enough food, or climate change or stuff like that. It's just too many people. Even if they are a bunch of zombies, they're still going to be eventually a threat if they, all of a sudden decide to pull their heads out of their rears. And with a strong middle class, it makes it harder for them to defend against that. The powers that be, that is. So as all of this is going on, they have, they don't have the money to pay for their taxes. They're dumpster diving. They're having money forced on them, basically, these bailouts and stuff like that, which is going to decrease their currency and stuff. What? And remember, in Greece you have the economic suicides, people killing themselves and stuff like that. Christine Lagarde, I believe, from the IMF, says here Greeks can help themselves out of the crisis by paying their tax. So just think about it, like a little expression. Just think about it. Think. See, you pay your taxes to the banks, and then you take on all this debt from the banks because of the banks. Then it all works out for the banks. See, you gotta think. Pay your tax. Says here, she has warned that Greece can expect little sympathy from the International Monetary Fund on its bailout terms and called for its citizens to help themselves. Oh, help yourselves by paying their tax. And of course, they say because it's a financial crisis, right? Always the crisis. Engineered crisis. It says here, Spain, 5 banks downgraded. Bankia's seeks 19 billion euros in aid, so Spain's next, and it says it's not looking good for the Spanish banking system. S&P just slashed their credit ratings of 5 banks and said the country is heading into double-dip recession, which is probably just like the United States, never really left a recession. Growth really never expanded. It maybe temporarily there was a little bump of people thinking that it was, so they went out and spent more, but yeah, they never really got out of a recession, but they like to use that word, a double-dip recession, kind of like the financial crisis. So, as this stuff happens, you're going to have this, right? I covered this before, and this is from the EUobserver.com. Radical left and neo-Nazis score well in Greek elections. So, Greek voters on Sunday, it says here, this was from May 6th, just so you know, said here that they punished the 2 ruling parties responsible for the last EU bailout and its austerity measures by giving the radical left and second highest number of votes and allowing a neo-Nazi party into legislature for the first time. And this is right around the same time EU austerity is feeding racism, report says. So I don't know if it's so much racism, but they like to throw that word around a lot. I use it sometimes because it just cuts down on, for time's sake. But it's basically people see all these immigrants that are flooding in, and there's too many people and not enough jobs, and they keep letting them in, and then they get on to the social benefit system, and they drain that, and then so you got these people that are born there, and they're just like, well, what the flip, but these politicians, they just keep doing it. They just keep doing it, right? Because a lot of them, they work for the IMF, right? They go and they work for these central banks, like Monty and all them. They're in Italy. They all just go back and forth. Holland, they all go to little Bilderberg meetings. So it's a big business. It's a big business, scamming people out of their futures and their wealth and stuff like that. And it says here that political polarization dangerous as psychologists. So this is a very, very, very dangerous article, and I'm not going to go through it all. You got to go through and read it yourself. But basically, say that everything, all of the premises that this quote live science writer uses is all based off false premises. So, and the best example is, of course, it says liberalism and conservatism are resulting in 2 political parties that seem almost alien to one another. Now, if you're a libertarian or you're a progressive, and you've actually spoke with one or the other, you actually find that there's a decent amount of things that you can agree on. If you had Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul, like that's why I said if you actually had one of them as a president, one as a vice president, or whatever, it would actually be a really good combination because they could come together on a lot of issues. They could actually compromise on some things. But they're talking about Republicans, which are neocon, kind of have that neocon thing going, and then they're talking about Democrats, which kind of have this quote communist thing going on. But really, they're both the same thing. They're both the same parties. But it's funny how they try to differentiate the 2 parties as if they're different. So this is what's going on in Europe. He says this is troubling, right? This is a dangerous area because people tend to cluster around their morals in group. It says here, view outsiders with only suspicion, not understanding. So those people that are in Europe and the United States that see all these immigrants flooding in, they just don't understand, right? They don't understand. They just don't have any moral empathy, right? So it says here, Swiss prepare plans in case of Euro's demise. This is from the 27th of May. Switzerland is considering capital controls to fight a sharp rise in the Swiss franc in the event of a Eurozone collapse. Remember, I said the Olympics could be a possible stage for what? All that security and all that for the possibility of this euro going down the tubes, right? So remember this, Switzerland is surrounded by, but not a member of the European Union. That's because this is the elite's own little money laundering country. where they also carry out heavy social engineering on the Swiss people, are what? They're like the UK. The UK currency is a pound sterling. It has no declared plans to adopt the euro. So these are the Rothschilds. These are the families, their own little private countries like Switzerland and England. They're not in it, right? They're not in that. But yeah, they're usually, Switzerland's usually, their currency, the franc, is a safe haven currency, as they call it. Banks ready for breakup of Eurozone. Policymakers and firms across Europe are making preparations to cope with a breakup of the single currency. It says the Bank of England governor said this month that it is too busy preparing contingency plans to cope with a potential major economic shock to the UK economy emanating from the Eurozone. The European Commission also said last week that it has asked member states to make plans to deal with a potential Greek exit. And then we have this Lloyd's of London preparing for Euro collapse. So the chief executive of the multi-billion-pound Lloyd's of London has publicly admitted that the world's leading insurance market is prepared for a collapse in the single currency and has reduced its exposure as much as possible. Then we have UK plans border controls for euro meltdown. The government is making plans to cope with a potential increase in immigration should the euro currency collapse, the Home Secretary has revealed, even though, just like the IMF, they do not expect it to happen. So, anarchist group vows to wage low-level warfare on Olympics. So I wonder, Olympics and all this security and the quote